Good evening and welcome to the February 28th, 2024 Middle School Building Committee meeting. This is a hybrid meeting, both in person and remote. Seeing that there is a quorum, we will adjourn or call the meeting to order. That was the quickest meeting there. So the meeting is called to order. First thing we have is approval of minutes from January 10th, 2024. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes from January 10th, 2024.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. Julie?
Yes.
Armin, yes. Marty?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Chris? Chris, I know you're on mute. Chris, yes? Oh, okay. Nicole?
Hello.
Minutes? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Motion passes.
Perfect timing.
Moving on next, new business. We have the designer contract review and vote. So we welcome the JWA staff here tonight. And Adam, hand it over to you for now.
Sure. I don't know if we want to start with just introductions. We can
Yeah.
introduce JWA, and then we can kind of go around the room and let everybody introduce themselves, if that works.
Be great.
Yeah, if you want to start, Christian.
Sure. Christian Whitsitt with Jones Witsit Architects, and principal there with Dory, and thanks for having us.
Dory Brooks from Jones Witsit Architects.
Jill DeCourcy with Jones Witsit Architects.
Nicole Allen, the principal at Glenbrook Middle School.
Tom Mazza, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations.
Ian Coddington, Finance Director for the town of Long Meadow.
Julie Morgan, I'm on the school committee.
Armin Ray, I'm the chair of the school building committee and the community representative to the school committee.
Marty O'Shea, Superintendent.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we didn't get you. Chris or Nick?
Nick, was that you? We can hear you.
They can't hear us, is what he's telling
Oh.
me.
Oldest.
Cannot hear us. Why that would be. How about now? Check one. Check, check. Can you guys hear us now?
Affirmative. I can hear you.
Awesome.
Was that pretty loud and clear, or I'm using the microphone on my laptop now, I believe. So you guys can hear us well?
I can hear you, Marty, loud and clear.
All right.
Yep,
Great.
same here.
All right. Intros?
Oh, okay. Nicole Chonier, Chair of the Long Meadow School Committee.
Josh Levine from Select Board.
Lynn Simmons, the town manager.
Alan Minkus with Colliers Project Leaders.
Adam D'Alessio with Colliers.
Nick and Chris? Go ahead, Nick.
They probably don't know what
Second
we're
here.
asking.
Oh, just introduce who you are.
Hi, Nick Turgenesis, Facilities Director with the town of Long Meadow. Chris Lichatadri, resident member.
So I wonder if they can't hear us because we're on your laptop with the speaker?
Previously, I had it on the OWL
Okay.
microphone, and I switched it over to my laptop speaker.
Nicole, number 2. Introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, sorry, just got a babysitter. I'm Doris, I am the principal of Williams.
And yes, you do have to be named Nicole to be a principal at the middle school.
And just, I know there was a few members that came in a few minutes late, so if JWA would just reintroduce yourselves again, just
Sure.
for those.
Christian Whitsitt, Jones Witsit Architects.
Dory Brooks, Jones Witsit Architects.
Jill DeCourcy, Jones Witsit Architects.
Can you,
Yeah.
David McGrain, President Member.
I think that's it.
What?
who's that noise?
It might have been out in the hallway. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks to JWA for being here tonight. We're very excited. So I know first on the agenda is the contract and proposal. So we did receive the proposal. We sent it off. Are we still hearing noises?
It's,
I keep hearing.
it's the slide, it's the sliding of the chair.
Chairs.
It's the sliding of the chair.
Yeah.
When we move the chairs, it's making us squeak.
I saw everybody's faces. I don't know if it was what I was saying or.
After you said, I was hearing it.
You have good ears.
Yeah, so
That's not,
it's this.
Yeah, it's the sliding of the chair.
Yeah.
holy crap, that's crazy.
It was doing it last night, too.
Back to you.
So we received the proposal for JWA through the feasibility schematic design phase. We did review the proposal and contract. And it seemed to us to be fair and reasonable. We did do comps from recent projects through the MSBA for middle schools, and it fell right in line with the other projects that we reviewed as well of the past couple of years. So, like I said, I don't know if everyone's had a chance to review it, if they had any questions. Feel free to ask if you do.
Adam, can you talk about it in relation to the amount that we were authorized by town meeting for?
Yeah, so we were authorized for $1.6 million overall. And so with our contract and with Jones Whitsett Architects, we are still well within budget within that $1.6 million. And then there's a separate category for some environmental studies and then for other, which we're still carrying a full amount for. So the amount that we were carrying originally for design firm came in lower than we were anticipating, at least on Collier's end.
Okay. And from a process perspective, just so everybody knows, the contract is from the MSBA.
Yeah, it's a standard contract that you find on the MSBA website, so there's no, deviation between contracts when it comes to this point between MSBA projects. So it is a standard contract that Jones Whitsett has already gone through and filled out in anticipation of it being approved.
All right, I'll open up any questions from the board. Marty, do you have some?
You said that this contract would carry us through schematic design, and then once you get into
Yeah,
next
so
phase.
essentially, so once you get, so essentially, this will get us up until town meeting, until it gets approved, and then once approved, then we go through and we'll do an amendment.
What percentage of the designer costs are typically carried at this stage relative to the designer costs for the whole project? Will this be the bulk of the design fees, or a small portion of the design fees, or?
Over, you're talking about for the entire project?
Yeah, so if the, the contract now is the 825.
Yeah.
Could we reasonably anticipate once you get past schematic design?
I can take that.
Yeah.
It depends on which solution we pick. I mean, if it's, and the expense of that, or the cost of that solution. But as in architecture, typically feasibility and schematic design is typically about 15% of the overall architectural fee in general.
Yeah.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any questions from anybody else? You look like you have questions, Josh.
Yeah, what does that sound? It's still it's driving me insane.
Half expecting a little mouse to run out.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the testing services that are associated with the contract and what we?
Yeah, so there's reimbursable services which cover, from geotechnical, there's hazmat services. Here, jump in, Christian, too.
Site survey, building survey. So basically everything where we don't really know the scope now. And so the purpose is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to kind of set aside a bucket of money for now for what we anticipate, potentially we could use for those hazardous material services, but we're very careful because we don't want to spend money now when we don't know what the final solution is going to be. So for instance, we're looking at 2 different sites, right? So are we going to do a full site survey for each of those sites? And likely we won't until we find out which way the committee is, leaning towards one particular site. Then we'll start doing more investigative work at that specific site. So it's likely that we won't spend all of the money that's within that reimbursable budget, but we try and set it aside and use a best guess of on past projects, how much have we used to make sure we do the due diligence, because really the whole point of this process is to make sure that that cost estimate at the end of schematic design is as accurate as possible. So that's why we want to make sure that we do some geotechnical testing, we do hazardous materials testing, so that that can inform that cost estimate.
And is the reimbursable services, the distribution, the amounts that you have at each bucket pretty typical of a project? Or is there anything that's unique about our project that caused you to want to set aside more money in one category than another? Or is this is pretty standard distribution?
There is one unique thing, I think, that I wanted to just mention, because we did talk about this a little bit, that it varies with every project, but the interest in ground source heat pumps, which has come along now and because of the way the stretch code has changed and our sustainability goals has changed, that has a higher preliminary testing cost than other projects have had. So we wanted to be sure that there was money in the reimbursable budget to allow for that possibility, that those potential site investigations were covered. Otherwise, every project really varies depending on all the other conditions and unique challenges. But that's grown, hasn't it?
In our end, we went back and looked again at projects that we've been on recently and compared the reimbursables to what JWA was presenting as well. And they fell pretty much in line with what they were presenting. And as Dory mentioned with the geothermal, if it's decided that it's something that the district doesn't even want to investigate, then that line item is not even touched.
So investigate on the geothermal, that is going to be drilling, I'm going to guess. And
Correct.
how many wells are we talking about drilling, or sites are we drilling to?
That'll be up to a survey, right? Essentially, they'll come out and do
As few
it.
as possible.
Okay.
Right.
As few as possible doesn't, if you don't hit the first 10, right? Like, as few as possible doesn't help, but
Well, yeah.
I just want to make sure I understand. And I know enough to be dangerous from, there's projects going on in my kid's school and the other projects I've been involved with downtown Springfield. So just asking to make sure we're all on the same page.
And just maybe to the same point, but we're talking about multiple site opportunities, right? So how does this factor into, how does that possibility factor into the cost estimate?
So that's a little bit different, because kind of what Christian was saying a little while ago is that we want to talk about, what site, are we going to investigate every site and drill on every site? Probably not. We're going to probably narrow it down to, okay, this is the site that we want to focus in on, so this is the site we're going to do our drilling.
Right. Now, how do we narrow in on the site we want to focus on without having certain information?
So that's where Jones Whitsitt comes into play, and they start their whole process of site selection and all those types of things, investigation.
Are there historical records available that might help us with certain information, like geotech information?
Oh, absolutely.
Certainly.
Yep.
But that's just going to be one factor, right? I mean, it's how the district is run and busing routes and traffic, and there's going to be lots of factors.
There's certain things that are pretty obvious, but there's certain things that are undiscoverable without doing a more detailed assessment. That's
Correct.
more what I'm interested in, is how do we know what we don't know?
Right.
Yeah, so I think once we narrow in on a location, that's when you start doing more geotech and drilling for wells and all those types of things.
So if we're down to the 2 locations, just for the sake of either Williams or Glenbrook, we're obviously going to have to do building or reno in space where typically that open field would be where you would do the geo field, where the old building would then be in place, kind of prohibiting you from exploring on the space that's already built upon. So I just want to make sure how we
The one thing
get
about
to that.
geothermal is that you're talking about what's happening 600 or, way down below. So the conditions that you're going to see between one side of a site and the other at that level are relatively similar.
Okay.
So it's not like you hit ledge and, you got to move 300 feet that way to get away from the ledge. It's a different condition at that level. So there's plenty. It's hard to say without the engineering being in the room how many wells you might need to drill, but we're currently working on a project where we're actually just doing one in one location, one in another for sites that are across town a little bit, but we actually will see relatively similar information from both of those sites.
Okay, perfect.
Can I ask a dumb question about this? We still have to go to the town if we decide that a single middle school is the right solution. We still have to go to the town to approve that.
Out of schematic design, we should come up with a single solution out of this committee to, yes, recommend to the town.
But I mean, I think as far as like the town's involvement in this, that question of one middle school or two is still like on the table, right?
That's for us to decide as the school building committee.
We don't vote on it, right? But
No.
they- that would be through the sounding sessions, we could get their opinion.
Right.
But-
So we get to decide.
We
but
decide.
I feel like I
So
knew
that's where
exactly
you bring your
the entire
preferred
thing, but-
solution
Yeah.
to, that they're going to vote
Right.
on. So
Right.
this committee is going to, through all the investigation and all the work, is going to determine what is the best option for the town. And then that option goes forward to town meeting to be voted on. But in the meantime, we're going to have a lot of community forums and all those other things presenting this. And so it's, if we're hearing from these community forums that we don't want one school, like overwhelmingly, then we probably have to change our thought going into it. But that's where that,
Okay.
you know, we're gonna get
Yeah,
get
that's-
feedback from the community along this
Yeah.
process. But ultimately, it's gonna come back to one decision with a, you know, an estimated price tag that's gonna go forward to the town for a vote.
But so the only veto point is the town voting on the budget or voting to fund the project.
Yeah, and they just say no, and then we don't have like, oh, okay, well then we'll just do
Right.
two schools. Like, it's not.
It's like-
It'll be two votes, one town meeting and then one on a regular ballot.
Okay.
Yep.
And if we propose one school and then the town rejects that, then we're just back to the drawing board.
Correct.
Then we were back to two schools that don't function for anything.
Correct.
Not the best place to be.
So that's why those community forums are very, very important, because that way you get a sense of what the entire town is
Okay.
thinking.
I was just asking that in relation to what you're talking about the siting. Do we always have to look at as you're doing this, are you always looking at like the Glenbrook site as one of the possible options, or are we just like assuming we're
No.
untethered?
No, I think our new friends are on board to help us make that selection of
Yeah,
what's
so it's
the
gonna be,
best
it's
site
gonna
and
be
the
some
best
time
area.
before we actually start
Okay.
doing geotech and, you know, trenching and taking wells and all that. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done ahead of time to figure that out.
Okay.
Great question. Anybody else? Nicole?
I was just wondering, when you're talking about potential reimbursable services, so when we see, say, traffic studies of
Mhm.
25,000,
Yep.
I'm wondering, when we get further along in the project and we say, okay, now we've landed on X location and we need a traffic study that's more comprehensive of that, is there a cap to the reimbursable services that is this, or is there a higher cap that we would be able to tap into for future studies?
Are we talking after, so say, after it goes to town meeting and then?
Sure, I'm just
Yeah,
wondering
after that,
if these are the limits for potential
Yeah, so
reimbursable
at-
services, or if there are higher limits as we could move along.
No, well, they're not, that's what we're contracting right now. If there was anything that we had to go above and beyond, we'd do an amendment with JWA
Okay.
if we happen to reach those caps.
And these are budgets, so one category can shift over to the other. If we're not using up, that
Correct.
budget, we can shift it to the other budget where we have a greater need.
Contract amendments would come before the building committee,
Correct.
and then that would in turn have to go to the MSBA for approval,
Yes.
the contract amendments?
Yeah, they would be approved here and then sent off, and
So I know things have changed since the high school. Who has the authority to sign off on change orders? Does it have to be a committee of the whole? Is it Lynn?
Adam and I chatted about that. I think that's a future decision for this committee as to how you want to handle change orders. And there's typically an
I know, Lynn,
authorization.
you have a lot of work already.
We did a staggered approach
Yeah.
for the DPW and the adult center.
yeah.
Different monetary thresholds had different levels of approval.
Okay.
And that's something I would recommend again. I think that worked out
Yeah.
well. And that's, again, typically you're not going to see change orders, or you won't see change orders until we start construction.
I just want to make sure we're starting to think about these
Yeah,
issues
no,
ahead of
absolutely.
time.
And I think the system we had in place with the other two projects, I think, worked well, and we do that on a lot of other projects. It just, set a tiered approval level.
Good. Any other questions? Comments? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on the contract.
Make a motion to approve the contract for designer services between the town of Long Meadow and Jones Whitsitt Architects, dated February 20th, 2024.
Second?
Motion and second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. Julie?
Yes.
Armin, yes. Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it? Yep. Thank you. All right. Moving on the agenda.
Armin, okay, just, so once that is,
Yeah.
and I believe, Lynn, you sign off on the contract?
Yes.
So once that is signed from you, I send a copy off to the MSBA, and then the MSBA would like to set up a, which they do at every project, is a kickoff meeting between the district and JWA.
We should have invited them.
We should have. And they'll have a kickoff meeting, just kind of, again, going over the expectations and all those types of things.
Awesome. Do we have to authorize Lynn to sign, or you just have the power as the town executive? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. All right, moving on. We have, well, while we're on it, Adam, you want to go through the milestone schedule or any updates while we're
Sure.
still
Yeah,
within
so
that purview?
the one I have here is just kind of the simpler schedule just to go through. And at the end of JWA's presentation, they may want to go over a couple dates too, because they're kind of just getting caught up on some of these dates as well, so.
Okay.
But designer contract executed, so I had February 19th through this evening. And then we have the existing conditions investigation from February 29th to April 15th. That's where JWA is going to start doing their research on their end. And then we have the preliminary design, the PDP, which is February 26th through May 3rd, which I think, Christian, you said you wanted to go through the PDP versus the
Yeah, we can talk about that.
PDP.
What all these
During your
acronyms mean.
Yeah, during your presentation, they can get a little bit more in-depth into that. But again, that's going to be a few months. That's going until May 3rd. And then what I did plug in here is 21A, which is the JWA and then Glenbrook Middle School and William Middle School introduction with that visioning session that we're going to do, kind of a kickoff meeting. So that's going to be with Nicole and then their staff.
Right. And can I ask a quick question while you're doing that?
Yeah.
Right now, we have our staff all get to be in an auditorium. Is that conducive to what your plan is, or should they be sitting at a table to be writing during this opportunity? We can accommodate either situation. There'll be technology there, so we can do things either where we're getting responses electronically, or we can break into kind of small groups. But in terms of number of people, what's the staff total? How many people do you expect?
About 75, 80.
Yeah, I think the auditorium's fine then, because we have an hour and a half, so
Right.
some of that is gonna be spent just getting people up to speed, answering their questions, big picture, which everybody's gonna wanna hear the answers,
Okay.
I think, so that's probably fine.
Okay, thank you.
And that's going to be March 8th. So I know this meeting was an add-on meeting because of the contract. So our next meeting, again, is in 2.5 weeks. I guess the question was, do we want to still have that meeting in 2.5 weeks, or do we want to hold off and go to the next meeting?
Let's keep it on the calendar, and then if
Okay.
we have to cancel a few days out, you, me, and Marty can get together and
Perfect.
make that
Okay.
decision.
Great. Yeah, so the next big thing is going to be that March 8th meeting with the two schools and the staff.
You want to go over the schedule?
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah. I mean, it's something new that you might see. This is a high-level view of the schedule, something a little bit more graphic. And it's laid out where across the top, you'll see the dates for the next year and a half that we're looking at to bring us to the town vote. And the little red boxes at the top are the meeting dates that we have with the school building committee, with you folks. And then you can see that we've gone through the yellow bar on the left. That's the forming the team. You've hired the OPM ourselves. You've hired Jones Winset. So you can see the flag going down with today's date. So there's where we kick off to Module 3 with the MSBA, and that's the feasibility study and the components that go into the feasibility study. And you can see the marks that we're trying to hit on those dates, and they align with the bottom stars. Those bottom stars are the MSBA's Board of Directors meetings. And so we can't just go in the day before and try to be on their agenda. We have delivery dates for the material that usually is 4 to 6 or 8 weeks, and sometimes 8 weeks ahead of time. So it's critical that we stay on this schedule so that we have those deliverables to the MSBA so they can be addressed and voted on at their meetings. But you can see how this is going to map out till 2026, or 2025, I'm sorry, till when we are looking to go to the town vote for the project. So kind of a high-level view that you can keep in mind. So sometimes it's a little tougher to look at schedules like this, what's crossed out, and go, where are we really? But we'll be bringing this to every meeting, kind of giving you an update as to what's transpiring.
Yeah, I think the good thing, specifically to your question, that, you know, green and pink will get us all the way to that vote.
Any questions on that, or of what this all means?
Means right now we're still on track.
And we're going to stay that way.
Any questions on any of the timeline or schedules? Good. All right, then JWA, the floor is yours.
Sure, so we thought a nice way to start off would be to run through the presentation that we gave to the MSBA in our interview process. I think it will help walk through the process a little bit and demonstrate some of our early thinking. And we said this a lot during the interview, but you know, we produced all of this in a vacuum, which is a hard thing to do. I mean, I think it helps the MSBA and hopefully the three representatives from Long Meadow that were there understand kind of our thought process and how we go through things and present. But you know, it's much more fruitful when we can gather your input. So I think tonight we're hoping to definitely have it as more of a conversation, and I think we'll present pretty informally. Feel free to interrupt. Feel free to ask questions. I think it will.
Give me 1 second.
We also have a lot of slides, so we'll cruise through some of them. So Marty, I might be asking you to hit next a lot.
All right. Let me just try and pull it back up. Pardon?
It's probably a very large file.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you might want to
Still loading.
download it.
I had it up earlier, tested it, of course.
Yeah.
Give me 1 more second.
It's just like the MSBA day.
It's only when
That looked awful on your end.
it's only when Adam's around. I run Zooms all the time. And
Sabotage it.
Yeah. All right, give me 1 second here.
Good thing Carl's not here.
Yeah, right. Carl was not happy with us. So I'm a little hesitant to go full screen on this.
Right? Could just present it from here.
Yeah, so apologies, but if that's okay, we'll just keep it this way.
Great.
Let me see. All right, you want to take it away, and we'll see if it catches up. Maybe I can go full screen.
Sure.
All right.
So at the interview, we had 6 of us there, Jill and Dorian, myself, from Jones Woodson Architects. Brian Jareb will be the landscape architect on the project. He's with a firm called Halverson, which is actually just acquired by Ty and Bond. So Ty and Bond is a local firm, does a lot of civil engineering as well. So yeah, I think working with them through this interview process was fantastic. George Martin down below is with LN Consulting. They're mechanical, plumbing, and fire protection engineering. They have offices in Vermont, but also in Northampton. We custom chose them. You know, we work with a lot of different engineers on all of our projects. George in particular has a ton of experience with geothermal, as well as the local tax or the recent tax incentives. And then Suzanne from Vason Studio will help on both the ed planning, which is critical at this early stage, as well as furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And it's unique that their firm kind of offers both of those packages, and we, again, are looking forward to working with them because I think there'll be a lot of nice continuity between all that, reaching out at the beginning of the project all the way to the end of the project where we're thinking about furniture and how critical that is in the classroom environment.
It might be worth mentioning that that's a very small stretch of the
Yeah.
consultant team. The team is actually, technically 29 different consultants, represented fields, and each of those has their own group. So I don't know if everybody's seen the full proposal that lists that, or if you have any questions about who else is on the team and what other specializations there are. But, structural, security, geoenvironmental, so the whole gamut of all the services that you'll need are all working with us as a team. These are just the 6 that present well.
A lot of these are to introduce Longmeadow to the MSBA. We're never quite sure how much the MSBA even knows where Longmeadow is. We are west of the 495. So you guys know where Glenbrook and Williams are. And similarly on kind of the sense of community of Longmeadow. I mean, I think it's certainly important to us, but you don't need to hear our kind of proposal on that. So initial site analysis, this is a perfect example of we'd love to hear your input from our initial impressions. Looking at it, we tried to think about a little bit about both the Glenbrook and the Williams site. On Glenbrook, we talked a lot about the circulation and feeling a little bit strange coming through the neighborhood off Cambridge Circle, and some traffic issues there. That it seemed like potentially a major entrance off of Barbara Lane might make more sense. That's a big question mark. Talking about pedestrian access. The fields to the north side of the school certainly seem like a tremendous resource, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. And then there are wetlands on this site on the west side. They're kind of outside of the buildable area, so they're not so much of a concern and really seem more of a resource, potentially something that the school could be more connected to. Williams site, a little bit smaller, as you know, of course, more centrally located, off of Williams Street seems to make a little bit more sense. The existing parking drop-off really kind of stressed our landscape architect out, that it's very strange that if you drive from Williams Street to the north, it seems like you have to go through the drop-off lane to keep continuing on that road.
Your confusion is understandable.
Okay, great. And then we very briefly touched on kind of the status of the existing buildings, just kind of classic buildings of their era. Williams seems to be in a little bit better shape and have, some slightly better finished materials, but in general, both indicative of their eras and have the kind of standard problems with accessibility and hazardous materials and inefficient systems, and all of that was covered pretty briefly. Tori, you want to kind of...
So we just tried to share this to talk a little bit about the variety of schools that we've done, and how with every community we really try to focus on what's unique to that community and what their goals and needs are, and they really do vary. We've been as a firm working in this field for roughly 40 years. Margot Jones began the firm in Greenfield in the northern part of the valley, and we pride ourselves on really focusing on towns in the valley and their unique needs and special interests. So this is a bit of a broad strokes overview of the work that we've done. We do go farther east now a little bit, but we're still really, our heart is in schools as a firm. We're a firm of 16 people. I think there's a little bit more that we'll talk about the firm as a whole. But really, education is our focus, public education specifically, and MSBA projects are the bulk of what we do as a firm. And then the next slide, really we start talking a little bit about process here. We wanted to, in our presentation, really emphasize that this phase of the project, the feasibility phase, is the most critical phase in a sense, because if you don't get past this and you don't have a successful override, then the project doesn't move forward. And we know that with the cost of construction being what it is, that is super, super critical. Your brief really talked about reimagining middle school education, and that excited us a lot. Our process really does moves with you to try and understand what the community's goals are, to really give you opportunities to explore it a little bit. And it's an interesting process because while we're doing that, we also talk a lot about the MSBA's grant process and keep track of what is reimbursable in order to help you achieve also an effective grant relationship with the MSBA. I'll just stop right here. We didn't talk about it in the interview, but I think it's important to talk about the three phases of the feasibility study, since we were talking about it briefly before. That it begins with the phase, the PDP phase, where we really are mostly focusing on the educational vision and the different enrollment possibilities and what that means as a size of school, and simultaneously looking at your existing conditions of the different schools and looking at your possible sites. And we only know of these two sites. If there are others, this would be the time to talk about other sites if there's any consideration of that. But what we'll be doing is exploring quite a few variations of a theme of how you could go about this, both looking at renovation, addition, new construction for a single school, or consolidation. And again, this is our first opportunity to find out if this committee already has perspectives on that. At the end of that phase, which according to the schedule we're currently looking at as a 10-week phase, we don't narrow to one, we just narrow a little bit more, try and get a little bit more specific. You by then should be able to sort of say, yeah, this is where we're heading. And then we'll do another phase where we'll get a little bit deeper on some. That's the PSR phase. At the end of that phase, we are determining what the schematic design, the single option that you want to go forward with. So what we wanted to talk about, and you can go to the next slide, is that in this process, we want to keep reviewing the possibilities and what that means programmatically, in scale, in form a little bit, on site what it means in the context of the community, but also what it means to the community. We have to be having this discussion with the community, so as you were saying, Julie, you're finding out from the community, what their tolerance for these ideas are as well, so that by the time we get to the end of schematic design and you go out to the community to ask for their blessing for the project, it's not a cold concept to them. They've actually heard the conversation. And we found, as I know we've been working with East Long Meadow, and we began community engagement from the very beginning. It really is critical to the success of the project to do so. So in this process, part of our job, we find, is to really help explain the reimbursement formulas with the MSBA, which are very confusing. And you all have done a high school not that long ago, so perhaps it's a little less confusing here. But there are different, it's not as if you have a rate of reimbursement with the MSBA where every square foot is treated the same. The MSBA grant program emphasizes certain educational space and has guidelines for the sizes of those space. So we have to kind of communicate about that and constantly vet your program goals as we go. And try and make clear, when you're talking about something that is not likely to get as much MSBA funding, so that it's clear to the ultimate budgeting process for you as well, and your percentage of funding for the project is clear to you. And to some degree, we have enough experience to be able to do that, but it's also true that you won't hear the final answer on that from the MSBA until actually the end of the schematic design process. So, next slide. Again, this was just emphasizing the different ways in which we'll be doing engagement, and that I'd say that while we have tools that we apply in every that are available to us, it really is different with every community. It depends a lot on what the community's interest and engagement. It depends on whether you're in the middle of COVID, how you might go about doing it, because we have virtual methods, we have surveys, but we also really find that public meetings are super fruitful where people have an opportunity to ask questions directly. We also strongly emphasize the importance of having town leadership involved and regularly meeting with them to keep them abreast of the project, because their leadership in the process really helps as well. So a little bit more about us. Again, we are a 16-person firm with 7 licensed architects. We are opening an office further south of Greenfield now in Florence, and we'll be moving the entire office down there, hopefully, within the year, we hope. The projects that are on the screen are projects that we're currently involved in. They're all at different phases, so we wanted to reassure you that this is the only project that we're working on that's in feasibility. And Christian and I, the MSB always assumes you have very strict roles in what you do and how you do it, but we tend to really balance each other but work with each other on everything, and I think Ellen and Adam can attest to that. But we do have different, we're involved at every phase together. I'm heavily involved in the educational programming and planning and the outreach and engagement process, though we'll be at all of those things together. I tend to stay a little bit more heavily involved up through DD. I'm still involved beyond that, but Christian's involved also from the beginning, but he doesn't get as involved in the educational planning decision-making as I do. He tends to be involved more heavily on some of the coordination, but we kind of go like this all the way through, which is not necessarily the way that a larger firm might do things, but we're just that embedded as a firm. And in our office, all 16 people will be involved in this process, but you'll see, a certain number of people throughout the process. And typically, you'll probably, in the feasibility study, probably meet 7 of us, and then the major consultant engineers that will be involved as well.
If I could interrupt for just 1 second, a lot of acronyms being thrown out here, and I don't want to confuse it. And you can hardly see it. PDP will stand for Preliminary Design Program. You'll see that a lot coming up. And PSR is Preferred Schematic Report. And DD is Design Development. These are architectural terms. And CDs are construction documents. So I just want everybody to be clear, you're hearing a lot of those things.
Sorry,
They may be a little confusing.
The other 2 projects we're working on, East Long Meadow High School near here, that's actually in construction documents at this point, and David Prouty High School is in construction. Suzanne spoke to this. She's our educational planner for this project. And as Christian mentioned, we actually chose to work with Suzanne because we have been, I went back and got certification as an educational facilities planner because I was finding that too often the process that many public schools go through, you have an educational facilities designer involved very briefly, and then they're kind of gone. And the problem is, as you probably know, you're talking about not just changing the school's building, but also your approach to education to some degree, the culture of the school. So if you talk about those things and then don't talk about them throughout the schematic design and then design process and sort of plan for that, then those things won't get implemented correctly. So we engaged Bayesian Design because they are more engaged both in the visioning process, the planning process, and the furniture, fixtures, and equipment decision making. And we thought that was a healthier way of having them engaged throughout because we had not felt that we got as much participation as we wanted. And we think this is a critical part of it all, really. So we also spoke at this slide about the developmental significance of this period of, and working with districts in the middle school age, how particularly in this time, I'd say around COVID, you find there's a shift in attitude about education that has everyone very concerned about keeping interest and involvement. So in this, it varies with every project how deeply we go into exploring and opening up the box, essentially, of educational mindset. And Suzanne's job will be to sort of help us present ideas and talk about that and gauge interest from the district and work to shape that. I wanted to also mention that one of the most important first delivery points for the project comes from the district. While we're doing this visioning, the district begins to write an educational plan for the school, and it becomes what we reference throughout. And the MSBA is quite clear that it's coming from the district, and we do assist in some ways, and we make sure that it's aligned with what we're talking about with the building, so there's a lot of back and forth. But that comes partly out of the visioning process and talking about, your curriculum, how it's being delivered, what are the challenges you have, say, for instance, at Glenbrook, where you have an open plan model and how that hasn't worked necessarily, how might you be changing, what kind of additional spaces do you need in the school, and why, and how that ties to the actual academic program and schedule, and what spaces are utilized and to what degree. So that's all part of that process that delivers that document that the MSBA takes very, very seriously, and that we as designers will use as the basis for all of our work going forward. And that happens in this early window as well.
Can I ask a question along those lines?
Yeah.
So, just having been on the high school project, and my own experience, I'm in IT. So we have what's called MVP, another acronym, or the minimum viable product, right? The product that will work in the marketplace and sell. Then we have the customers who dream beyond MVP and they want to customize everything. And customization in the software world is a dirty word, right? Or we call them extensions, so it makes it sound prettier. But when you start opening, I loved your answers in the interview in regards to the academic side of it. I love the fact that we're talking about how do we make the building work for the programs as opposed to programs have to be shoehorned into a building. But at the same time, what tools are brought to bear to keep like the visioning from going beyond what's actually fiscally possible?
And going back a couple slides, remember the slide where I was talking about it's maybe, I hate to say that this is, I think it's helpful that we have knowledge of what the MSBA's funding process is and why it exists. It's not just this is how much they'll give and that's why you should make a decision, because every district's going to make decisions that are beyond the MSBA's.
And I totally get that.
Right?
We added a stage that moved up and down. We added 600 additional seats into that. We paid $1 million for a pool that we didn't know was in such bad shape. So yeah,
what's also embedded in that funding system is their emphasis on education. So there are certain amounts of square footage dedicated to certain types of spaces for a particular reason, and that's a sort of statewide commitment. And Massachusetts commits more square footage per student per classroom than almost any other state. And so even though we may start to think about, well, why don't we do it this way or that way, there are some things embedded there that we're actually going to find maybe don't allow us to completely go to the direction of, say, the open plan in the 1970s went, right? And I don't think that's bad, because ultimately we want a building that is going to last another 50 years. What has really changed is the ability to, the commitment to special education in our schools has opened up additional types of spaces that we have not had in schools in the 1950s. And that square footage commitment from the state encourages districts to look and create those more useful spaces to support all of the students' needs, not just, the need to learn math, So I think that it's a bit of a push and pull that keeps you from, I think you find if you look around Massachusetts schools, they're not, each school is not its own revolution happening, in a way that would be a problem. But often we don't find districts are actually asking as much about where education is going as perhaps they should. So it's very exciting to us that this is a district that's asking that, because what you don't want to do is just reproduce the same school that you've been frustrated by, that was designed around a 1950s sort of factory model or jobs that were available then that are no longer available. So it's a good question to ask, I think.
So part of it is you're sort of working within the reimbursable space that the MSBA has. How can you work imaginatively inside inside that reimbursable space? So like in this example, if you want a medical suite here it says the reimbursable square footage is 1,095 square feet. So I don't know, is that based on a particular size school, or is this just a hypothetical example?
Well, that's actually a 900-student middle school, so that seemed
Okay.
like a good example,
Okay,
right? So,
gotcha. Okay.
and that didn't work for that district. They wanted significantly more than that. They understood they would get it. But what's also interesting as an example here is this shows you a school that had been conceptually originally a sort of cells and bells classrooms with a long hall, right? And how it's changed is all of those orange spaces and the open space between them allow for more project-based learning, more pull-out space to support students who have individual needs. So that's the kind of thing that I think now we can bring in and talk about and explore, and it gives us some room for some variety that hopefully can accommodate where you are today and where you see yourself going. And that's where that, but we still have classrooms, so we're not going away from that entirely. It's an iterative process, as I'm sure you've seen in other architectural projects, where we start and move from bubble diagrams to models and move from there. And along the way, there's also now a lot greater emphasis on what the experience students and teachers are having in the classroom is and how flexible you want to allow that space to be. So furniture is a larger part of the conversation than it probably used to be, because you want to make the space more adaptable and revisable. So that again brought Vazen in for that reason, and this just shows you some of their work with students, because we would want to engage with students and faculty in a very kind of workshop-based way as well, not just in the early phase, but we'll continually come back and talk with the faculty and explore their interests. We talked a little bit about security and safety and all the different technologies involved in that today. We have a very skilled consulting firm that we work with, Good Harbor Techmark, and they have been with us on a number of projects now, and very easy to work with and effective, so we will talk about that. We often have some of those conversations not necessarily in the public eye, because we don't want to have too much information in the public eye, frankly, about the details of the design, but that's important to keep in mind.
So this body could go into executive session
Yeah.
if we're discussing security systems, right?
Great.
Yeah. I'm going to try and go
I don't think there's an exception for that under the open meeting law, but okay.
for security systems.
I think we could form a subcommittee of the committee, a safety subcommittee, but
Placement of security systems and device, I don't know. Well, we can, yeah.
well,
I'm going to try and go full screen on this just to see, because I know the next part, some of these slides are interactive, so I want to do it justice, so let me see what happens here. See if it loads.
Thank you for those coffee break.
There we go. All right.
Well, yeah, maybe I'll step in for George Martin, our engineer. Again, this is a large high school they did up in the Burlington area of Vermont. I think, again, George brings a lot of experience with geothermal and with tax incentives, but also with energy modeling. They will be producing, this is kind of further along in the process than Dory's been talking about, but we'll do a life cycle analysis of different mechanical systems so that you can really understand, both the cost for the construction, but also the life cycle costs that the districts will be looking at down the road. And that's, helpful in all regards, thinking about the architecture as well, of thinking about not just the construction costs, but the maintenance costs and what those will look like going down the road. We specifically wanted to look at both the Inflation Reduction Act as well as Mass Save Path 1. For the Mass Save Path 1, we are pursuing that again down the road at East Longmeadow. So we're quite familiar with that program. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, I think that's a really interesting one that, again, we'll get into much more detail with you all as the project goes along. But I think some of the interesting parts are, one, that the funding, the credit that you get can not only cover the system itself, but also kind of the associated work with that system. So again, George is very careful about, if we place the geothermal wells under a parking lot, then we can potentially get some of that credit for the parking lot work as well. or field work, et cetera. And then also how we orchestrate that with the MSBA funding will be an interesting conversation because, the IRA funding comes at the very end of the project after everything's complete. The MSBA, of course, won't, I think we'll have to, if we go down the road of looking at the Inflation Reduction Act funding, we might have to factor that in at the end of schematic design, basically increasing the project cost, knowing that eventually they will come down, but the MSBA won't, guarantee that that funding is going to happen. And so for the short term, those dollars will have to be on the local side of things. So again, we'll get into much more detail as LN comes down and presents, and but some complications that we'll have to keep in mind with this.
Are there
this new
specific
possibility.
consultants that you would work with to help us maximize and make best use of the IRA reimbursements, or is that internal for you guys, or how do you do that?
I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
So the districts that have successfully navigated the IRA have often brought in a kind of a tax advisor, because actually what it's oddly doing is taking something that used to be available as a tax incentive to the private sector and making it available to municipalities. But it's not something that, that this team is designed and skilled at doing, or the town is necessarily the engineer. We particularly brought LN on because they have been involved in a number of projects, but there's a level of application process ultimately that's necessary that benefits from having, that type of an advisor. And I think some towns have kind of ultimately not necessarily gone after these opportunities because they didn't know how to work through the process with the town. So I think it's something that we would probably talk with the OPM about whether or not that there might be a need. And some towns have more capacity than others to pursue that. But as Christian was saying, the other thing that's been a barrier for communities is that if you're having the community vote on these costs, and some of those costs aren't going to get paid back until late, even if it's in your best interest in the life cycle analysis and the ultimate 30-year cost of the mechanical systems to go with one system or the other, the upfront cost might be the scary challenge. So the more you can make all of that clear and pursue all that information, the better. So it's still somewhat new in Western Mass, particularly that these programs have actually started to have some impact on projects. So.
The IRA credits don't expire at some point?
No, currently, ultimately, the IRA is available. I believe it's going to be, was it 10 years that they're talking about?
Longer for geothermal.
And longer for geothermal. And geothermal, it really makes the difference on the geothermal because we have a fair amount of support, through Mass Save. But usually the payoff on geothermal is where you get the problem. So it's making up that extra 30% difference. That makes that a reality. So we hope that sticks around. There's always that fear people have, but it's pretty hard, even with a political change, to pull back the IRA, which it's like a lot of things. When you start putting it out there and it starts getting used, how easily can Congress or the White House reverse a program that large? So, but geothermal is expected to be around for a long time.
Just some examples of JWA and LN working together. They're involved in the PV array at East Long Meadow, and that was an interesting concept that George had brought up. He, again, can talk about this further, but one thought is if we do the IRA funding and that money becomes available at the end of the project, maybe it's at that point in time that the town invests in photovoltaics for the school as an option, because suddenly that will be a new funding source that comes, again, right at the tail end of the project.
But that needs to go into design ahead of time, right? For weight tolerances on the roof and all that other kind of stuff?
Yeah, and it would no matter what.
That you design, you have to design, the new start code requires that you design for the capability of PV anyway.
Right. Yeah, so some options that we wanted to run through, and again, this was hard to do in a vacuum, One thing that we made clear at the interview, and I don't know if you guys remember the original written proposal that we submitted, but we had kind of looked at these three options. Again, we didn't have quite as much time for that written proposal, and then we had a little bit more time to think about the interview process. But even in that brief window, these options have changed. And so we look forward to, of course, changing them a lot more now that we're on board. Actually, Mario, if you could go back just for a second, I'll just, on all three. So on Glenbrook, we had put the new building, as people have kind of thought, to the north, where the fields are. And then once we really started looking at it, it just made sense to actually try and pull it a little bit south and preserve those fields if that's at all possible. And we think it is, with a little bit of phasing. For the Williams Ad Reno, we had more of the new construction heading further south, again into the play area, into the fields, and looking at that a little bit more with our landscape architect in particular and civil engineer, we thought about kind of condensing the building a little bit further to the north to preserve as much of that open space as possible. And then even looking at the Williams New, we kind of had a long parking area and drop off along the west side of the building in our initial proposal. And then thinking about it some more, looking at the interaction with William Street, it seemed to make sense to have a drop-off loop and parking to the south, and to kind of streamline Williams Road, or no, sorry, that's not Williams Road, but to streamline the road and the drop-off loop to the west, and again, preserve as much open space to the north as possible. So on Glenbrook, that's the existing there, and then this was just a quick diagram of how we could potentially phase it. So potentially we could demolish just the gymnasium first, which is showing up now in pink, and then keep the students in the rest of the school while the new school is being built. And once the majority of the new school is built, then you would finally kind of demolish that central core and add on administration and media center. And here you can see kind of a proposed site design. Again, we were interested in having a main entry off of Barbara Lane. I think if the next click, Marty. Yeah, so here we can see kind of a potential bus drop-off in the blue, a potential car drop-off in the red. Do the cars come through the neighborhood to the east? Do they come from Barbara Lane to the south? Still kind of to be figured out, but we have a parking area in the kind of more narrow triangular portion of the site, and then the building to the north, emphasis with connection to the outdoors and to the wetlands. Looking closer at the building, and I think where you can click through these pretty quickly, that would be great. So yeah, entry, admin, media, all around kind of an open courtyard, cafeteria, a STEM wing, connecting to an academic wing, and a gym to the north. Nice that the gym is located near the playing fields. And potentially that academic wing could be organized 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, one grade per floor, but a lot of that would come out of the programming that Dory has been talking about.
And the other thing that was sort of worth mentioning, because this is really just so early, what this shows you, some of what all of these show you is, as architects, we're often looking at solar orientation to get the best daylighting to the classroom. So there's often, you'll see certain things repeat, like how to be sure that knowing the scale of classrooms and how they can be organized in the number of classrooms and the enrollment for the school. We're already looking at that. But you'll see some of that. You'll also see some of those questions that are always there in projects. Do the community spaces want to be to the front of the school and the academic separated for reasons relating to how the community uses it? Are there connections to the outdoors that are obvious based on the site? So those are the kinds of things that are going on, but in no way would we expect the design that we're going to come up with to necessarily look anything like this. It's just, it helps you to see some of the big picture thinking that might happen in this early phase.
Right. I should also back up and say all three of these options, as you've seen them now, are assuming a consolidated approach. Yeah. And that was basically so that we could put the largest building on the site and make sure that the site worked. I don't think, we don't have a one way or the other, but we wanted to at least kind of test out whether that larger building footprint would fit.
So the other two options we looked at are both at the Williams site, and there were definitely some advantages with this site that we felt the central location and the proximity to other schools. We also felt like this school was in slightly better shape than Glenbrook, so lends itself a bit better to an ad reno option. What you're seeing here is that we'd be saving the auditorium and the cafeteria, which are shown in white, and then the pink shows what would be demolished. And then if you go ahead, the new classrooms and gym would be to the east of the existing building. So then, going ahead, the advantage of doing this, so having the new construction to the east of the existing school allows you to minimize disruption during construction to some degree. That said, there would be phasing required in order to get that new construction built. And then you're saving the open space to the south as it is currently, while improving the drop-off.
What's that buffer like on the east? Is that you can build right up to that buffer there?
I think
Is
it's
that-
something we would want to explore, more
Yeah.
carefully.
Yeah.
But there is, there's a fair amount of space there.
Yeah.
And these are scaled correctly based on, the academic classroom kind of proportions. So
were you
Yeah, yeah.
saying with this kind of option that there'd be a period of time where the kid would have to be elsewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the advantages of an ad reno scheme like this is that it allows you to save the auditorium. And the reason why that could be beneficial is that with the way the MSBA reimbursement works, a similarly sized and programmed auditorium would not be reimbursable in a new school. So there's definitely some value in exploring options where you could hold on to those spaces. And you can go ahead and click through these. This is just showing how the program would lay out. There are definite challenges that come with a renovation, however. Bringing a 1950s school building up to the current energy code is especially challenging with new requirements for ventilation and thermal performance. So that can be very challenging given existing structure and ceiling heights. So that is a definite challenge. The other option we looked at for Williams is all new construction built on the south side of the site in the open area. And of course, unlike the other two, this one, there's no phasing required because it's just built in the open area. So that simplifies things. It's also a flat site, primarily and mostly flat. So this option would allow the most flexibility for the design to kind of optimize it and orientation. We also like that it fronts Williams Street, so it has a bit more of a civic presence. That was something that seemed appealing. And you would still have the open space in the back where the school that is existing would be demolished. So looking at this one, again, we have a little bit more flexibility here in the layout. So you have your entry to the south, so you get to have this nice sunny, welcoming entryway. The educational wings, the classroom wings are running east-west, so you have optimal daylighting in the classrooms, and then all of those are connected with your STEM kind of bar, and then the gym would be in the rear with proximity to the open spaces. So it gives you a lot of kind of benefits that come from that.
Is the size that you can achieve with the renovation similar to the other two, or is it smaller?
It would be end up with the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
All three scenarios present
They all
comparable
present the
square
same.
footage.
The ad reno might actually be a little bit larger because of the auditorium, right?
And on the new, that one does or does not envision an auditorium?
Does not.
Does not. Okay. I think you're going to find that will be something very important to the community.
That's good.
Right.
Super important to the community.
Yes.
So then that'll be an interesting conversation of whether that's worth going ad reno just for that particular aspect.
Well, I was going to say, the only
or
thing good about Glenbrook is
the auditorium, right? Or is it worth having an auditorium that's unreimbursed
Yeah.
square footage in the
It might
new?
be,
It's
yeah.
another.
Yeah.
So there's a few ways to
What's the status of the model school program right now? Are they doing it in modules or as a full package, or?
They're doing it. It is not as popular as it once was.
Yeah.
And it's certainly an option. I think that basically we would take you through the feasibility study and schematic design. And then if the committee was looking towards the model school program, then you would look at model schools, the options that are out there. You would pick your favorite, and that architect would become your architect, and you would move forward with that project. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to appear biased. It's hard not to be. I mean, I think that the difficulty with that program is that there are no model schools that you can pick from that have been built under the current energy code, and that's a significant difference from when they were built to even today, even a year ago. I think if you've got a constricted site, that can also lead to difficulties. In general, I don't think there's been the cost savings that folks thought there would be in kind of repeating a school twice. All of that being said, I think the process can go a little bit faster. There are some cost savings on the architecture fee. And so I think,
The challenge is you're making the site fit the model instead of the model fitting the site, really, instead of the building fitting the site.
Exactly.
So,
And also similarly with your educational program.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Right.
also part of what we'll do in the early phase, we'll find out what your needs are. For instance, if an auditorium is a critical goal, then all those things help look at the model schools, and you can look and see of the options that are available, are there any that actually do come close to meeting your goals or adaptable to your goals? That's part of the.
I'm asking more out of curiosity than advocacy for it.
Yeah.
Because I think,
Yeah.
we have unique culture and expectations here, and we would want a building to match those, our unique interests here.
Is there a difference in the timeline between the new build versus the ad reno, or is it all kind of line up about the same?
No, typically the ad reno will take a little bit longer, if you're moving kids from one portion of the building to another, are you introducing modular classrooms? Are you trying to fill up one of your middle schools to its max while you kind of take a few more kids out of another one? Just in general, that construction process takes a little bit longer. In terms of the design time, I think they'd be pretty similar, but you might be looking at an extended construction timeline.
So using parts of existing, it doesn't really save any time in the long run?
No, it can save a little bit of money. I mean, we did a very successful ad reno at Granby Elementary School with Colliers a few years ago, and the renovated portion of that building, the dollars per square foot were certainly less than the new construction dollars per square foot. That building was in pretty good shape, so we saved almost all of the finishes that were inside. We really reused as much of it as possible, so it really it varies between building to building.
So we'll do the existing conditions assessments of these buildings, but since Granby was done, it has gotten harder in the condition of schools like the two that you have, because of the era in which they were built and the absolute lack of any insulation or operable. There's just less that is of value given where you have to take it by code today. So you end up, it used to be you could just, add some fur in and insulate on the inside. It's actually, maybe now we'd have to do more on the outside and the inside. And at what point does that cease to actually reap the benefit of a renovation? So the energy code is making everybody struggle a lot right now with renovations, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of value in existing buildings too, So. But we will look at those, and I wanted to mention also that it's critically important to look at the renovation also because there will be people in the community who will also want to know, does that make sense? So we have to fully look at it so that all the information is in front of you before you make the decision.
I noticed the Williams principal looked horrified at that, and I didn't know why.
We went swimming in my school about a month ago, so I'm thinking of, what are we saving?
Fair enough.
Well, I think it's, when you're talking about, kids get one shot at middle school, and they're only in there for 3 years, and so if 2 of those 3 years are disrupted by construction, you're really, taken away from it's a critical time in their lives, so we'd have to be.
Already
Yeah.
challenging, kind of crazy development
Yeah.
time. It's
Yeah, so we'd have to be thoughtful about that. The other thing, we're televising this meeting, and I'm grateful that we have that opportunity because it gives us a chance to introduce Jones and Whitson to the community. But I would just caution anyone watching this to understand that what we're showing here is preliminary to the preliminary to the preliminary.
Yeah,
It's really
exactly.
just early stage, just to kind of get some conceptual ideas flowing in our heads. So it's a long process, and as recently as this morning, I was meeting with some parents who wanted the answers that we won't have for a considerable amount of time. So you just trust the process, and we'll arrive at a solution that makes sense for Long Meadow, I'm sure.
That's the tricky part, especially with early community engagement, which is critical, but, the first question is, how much will this impact my taxes? And we have a long way to go before we can get to that point in time, but I still think letting people know how the process works and bringing them up to speed and getting their input in these initial phases is really important.
Like giving people confidence in the process,
Exactly.
helping them understand the
Exactly.
process is really critical. Yeah.
So to that, we have a few extra slides beyond what we presented for the interview, just to talk a little bit about March 8th and looking forward, envisioning, and then after this, just kind of backing up a little bit more and looking at our favorite acronym of the PDP.
So we talked briefly about, we would love to hear, even before we get into this, actually, I would love to just take a moment to get some sense from you all about your community's readiness for this project and the conversations that you feel are already happening, if any, because what we want to know, and we can design the visioning process really around the community's needs and interests, and what your job is to really lead us. We'll offer you ideas, but we'll respond very much to your suggestions and proposals. So we did sketch out, just without having ever met you or knowing or hearing anything from you yet, some concepts for you to think about. So the first is that we start with one faculty engagement event, because we had the opportunity that there was a professional development day coming up. And that's a chance to really get the faculty aware of the project, and do some listening to them about their goals and visions for the project, and hopes and dreams, really. And then we will be spending time at both schools, ideally, just shadowing some of the educators or the principal, and observing the building and the educational process. And so a lot of that really is focused on how things are working, where the struggles are. We'll pick up a lot, we'll see a lot, and put that into our brains. And then what we'd like to do is a mixed group kind of community engagement event, a more significant sit-down event, workshop. And by mixed group, I mean members of the community, members of the faculty, parents, students ideally, where people are hearing from each other through those events as well. And that actually is very helpful. We will be presenting a lot of information, but also doing some real engaged exercises with the community in there. So that's part of the visioning rather than part of the outreach. Outreach is sort of when we're sharing back. And then from there, we want to ultimately go back to the faculty for a similar type of event, but a little bit more focused on the faculty, taking some of, by then, what we've heard and seen, and starting to kind of tailor a little bit towards and providing feedback. So a lot of what we do is bring you things based on what we see. You want more information to help you think and talk about things. So we'll come in with a little bit more focused workshop experience there. And from there, we really should be, by then, having dialogue with the district about that ed plan and helping to coax that into existence, looking at your programs and your different enrollment options and the programs that you want to do that you don't do, and starting to talk about how that might shape up in an ed plan. And then I think by then we'll start feeling like we have some vision for the project and some real key principles and guidelines that are going to drive the ed plan and the design process. And it's then that I would like to do a more focused student process. We can hear from students about the building early on, but I think what's then interesting then is to start exploring some real ideas that you have in the context of working with students, and talk a little bit about some of the educational priorities, because by then we'll have some sense based on the community's reaction to conversations about architecture, where the students' interests lie. And they often are pretty vocal about the architecture and issues like sustainability or, kind of functionality within the school. So that becomes a more useful time to have that student vision process.
When we do students, are we talking alumni? Are we talking high school kids that have gone through?
No, I'm talking actually middle school students, actually, and it can be high school students as well. It could conceivably be who have been through the district's experience of the middle school, or it could be students who are there. And frankly, I think it's best just to think in terms of focus groups, right? Because you can get some good content in a more engaged opportunity with students. It's great to have students who are on the younger side as well, potentially. I mean, when we're working in high school, we do spend a lot of time in the middle school because they're going to be in the high school. Elementary school, going to middle, maybe not so much. But it can be helpful sometimes to have the students become aware of and advocating for the project in some way. So it's not a bad idea to talk to the elementary school families about the project along the way, but not necessarily in the visioning process.
Okay. And I was asked, because having had a few kids go through middle schools recently, I'm sure they would have a lot to say about their experience educationally, like what the building did or did not allow them to experience. Yeah. But, okay, thanks.
Yeah. And they might be more articulate potentially if you get students who've just left.
So for mid-April, you just wrote Glenbrook on there. Is there any limitation on who you can talk to because we technically are approved for Glenbrook, or are you talking to both?
No, we could talk to both. I think what I was thinking at that point was just if we're talking about a focus group of middle school students, and we're talking about ideas about where the school's going, then maybe it wouldn't matter which school it was, but it could be both. It could be a combination of students. We don't know at this point how you function and what's easier, because there becomes this question about schedule of time and interruption of the student day. So it was simply thinking about we probably don't need to engage with every student at every school. So if it's a narrow group, do we want to just pick one site for that process? But every other event I've talked about, we've been assuming, and again in a vacuum, we've been assuming that we're talking about both schools, even though you're approved for one project. And that's something we'd love to talk about with you. Is that the case? Seems
Yes.
like,
Yes.
And is there?
That's why I asked that question,
Yeah.
because I assume that.
I mean, the economic reality of it is if we don't do one school, it's not going to improve.
Yeah.
We do not have the money nor the political will to get two separate projects.
Individual projects.
And considering all the other projects we've recently done and bonded as well. So, I mean, if the visioning leads us to say we have to have two neighborhood schools, I mean, economically, it's not going to be a viable solution. At least that's just my opinion, and I haven't heard
is
anything.
the only other than the financial impact of that, the other barrier to the consolidation idea could be the investment in neighborhood schools. Some communities are deeply invested in neighborhood schools, and it's not something they even want to engage with. But that's falling away for financial reasons, but that's not the case here. You think that the community is definitely open. And
We're in a 3 mile by 3 mile town. Like,
Yeah.
it's like kind of hard that it's not a neighborhood school wherever you go. But I mean, I know there are people who are tied to it, but we had the same thing. We had Converse School, and we had, Greenwood Park School, and all the other schools that we've closed in town to consolidate over the years.
I had a conversation on Sunday with someone who said, well, I like that there's two schools. It's people who grew up in town,
Yeah.
kind of. But I don't think it matters because we can't. So, but one of the things in the design document we got talked about like neighborhoods within the school, and that's something like I don't know if that would be
Yeah.
feasible to split have
Yeah.
a neighborhood of 6th, 7th, 8th, and a neighborhood of 6th, 7th, 8th, but.
And it's sometimes
yeah.
nice to think that way because of this developmental age, that you want to, the transition from 5th grade to 6th grade is a big transition, and sometimes you want to try and find a way to kind of soften that by keeping it to a small community before moving into the larger community. So that's part of that
Or,
conversation,
yeah,
how to
split
structure
6,
that.
yeah, right, so, I just thought that was a good idea for that.
I think that people are very open to the idea of one school. I think the question of where it's going to be is going to be the harder one for
Yeah.
people. I think you hear a lot of people who are like, absolutely, as long as it is where their middle school is. So I think that. And then I think from people I've heard from who are skeptical of the one school thing, it's because they think it's going to feel like a bigger environment for kids. So I think talking to parents about whether if you think it's going to feel like a better experience for kids, I think that'll be helpful.
It's actually conceivably easier to create a true team model in a middle school of 600 than it is with the numbers that we have right now. Like the true traditional teamed middle school that creates that small school sense that Josh is talking about. The numbers sometimes will allow you to do it. And I think it just opens up, huge programming doors for us, huge extracurricular doors for us, and I think we have some hard data from some surveying that we did prior to submission of the SOI that suggests that this community is ready to have that conversation about a single middle school. But
The additional programs that you're talking about, we've seen that as well, that you get to the scale that then allows you to bring in additional exploration for students. Are there things that you've been wanting to do that you haven't done?
Well, I think some of it is the limitations of shared staff across, in the areas of foreign language and music and library. And so I think that curtails schedules and creates some limitations. So even within our existing program, there's some limitations due to the small size of our 2 middle schools. But I think with a larger school, it opens up the opportunity for electives for kids that we don't presently have. And, our middle school principals can speak more to that than I can, but I think that's a conversation they're eager to have as well.
One thing that we knew would be important to a district, and thinking about that, is in terms of the number of full-time faculty and the sort of long-term, the way that your faculty then can actually not have to be stretched across a sort of broader age range. They might be able to focus within their specializations. Teachers becomes kind of an advantage to you over time. So it seems to also open up possibilities there. And developmentally, there's the stepping stone that it creates to the high school, so that you're not taking a student from an elementary school. And we have a battle going on as to whether Williams was originally an elementary school or not, whether it was built to be a middle school, because it feels scale-wise like an elementary school.
Yeah.
And that it must be a big jump for students when they go, say, from 5th grade into a small middle school that still feels sort of smaller, and then go to this school.
Yeah, our middle
That
schools
would
are
be-
smaller in size in terms of student
Yeah.
population than our elementary schools.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, there's nice things about that, too, but.
Right,
yeah.
for sure.
I do think the one issue that we have that probably should be out there for Tom, we don't have a lot of busing in town. So choosing one side or the over and the impact to transportation would be a major factor, I think.
I think that it's the busing thing, and then people are like the fact that their kids can bike to school. There's a lot of kids who bike to school. And then the proximity of the middle schools to the elementary schools. As a parent who does not drive to school, but I watch my husband do this every day, like, the drop-off to the middle school and the elementary
Yeah.
school is tight in terms of timing, because we don't allow the kids to get there. It's hard to drop the elementary school kids off earlier, basically. So that can be a challenge for parents.
Yeah.
Great. So this is goes kind of hand in hand with the handout that Adam and Alan passed around, just in terms of the building process and where we are. It's a little bit confusing, and we do use a lot of acronyms and state language, so thank you, Alan, for keeping that in check. But please do interrupt us and say, what are you talking about? So feasibility study is broken into 2 different portions. Those are the acronyms that Alan wrote on the board, and for some reason, the first one is called the Preliminary Design Program. I'm not too sure why. The second one is called the preferred schematic report. That one makes a little bit more sense to me. By the time you have a preferred schematic, that's your preferred solution, you're submitting that to the state. They're saying, oh, your argument makes sense. We agree with your preferred schematic. You may now proceed into schematic design for that preferred option. So those are the two modules for the MSBA. Yeah, then we stop, then you go into funding the project, and then we keep going into, hopefully with a positive local vote. So again, this preliminary design program, just to let you guys know what's involved in that, basically we submit, at that point it's basically a large binder with not that many drawings in it. Over time, the size of the binder goes down and the amount of drawings goes up of what we submit to the state. But this is really, as Dory mentioned, very early on is developing that education program. That's, again, from the district, but we'll provide previous examples and kind of help you through that process. The space summary program is a very large spreadsheet that will go through each and every classroom, science classroom, SPED space, administration space, et cetera. And that becomes a really critical document with MSBA, and that's where a lot of it becomes important at the end of schematic design, where you're talking about the cost of the project. A lot of it will have been baked into how that space program came out. So yeah, while we're doing the outreach to teachers and really looking at the programming, we're also evaluating existing conditions. So you will have architects and engineers crawling through your existing buildings. We'll certainly coordinate that with you guys so we don't drop in unannounced, but that will be a big part of this initial push. Site development requirements, same thing, really just looking at existing site constraints, site opportunities. So towards the end of this PDP phase, I mean, it's not very long, it's only 10 weeks, but that's when we really start developing the preliminary alternatives. And then also working with you, we find that it's really helpful to kind of set up some evaluation priorities, and these are kind of more objective ratings so that you can say, you know, how important is traffic impacts to you? How important is it that there be size for 2 soccer fields and 1 baseball field? How important is it to you that we have? And so then we can kind of rank all the different options and start coming to a consensus on which one starts making the most sense. Yeah, next slide, Marty. This is just an example from our project we had in Gardner. And so, you know, there's options 2, 4, and 6, as Dory mentioned. So we're at the end of the preliminary design program. This originally started as maybe 8 or 9 options. And by the end of the quote-unquote PDP, these were the 3 that were coming towards the top. And the MSBA does like to know if there's one that the committee is leaning towards. It's fascinating looking at this example because really we thought number 2 was going to be the front runner when we started the process, in addition renovation to a historic school. Option 6, by the end of the PDP, became very clear that that was going to be the preferred option, and that site diagram looks nothing like the final school that was built. So interesting to see how much things can change from even the end of that phase. And then just a graphic of what you've got in front of you.
Any other questions for JWA? Thank you, that was very helpful.
You're welcome. That's a lot to cover. So, yeah, questions tonight or going forward, certainly feel free to reach out.
So, just keying on the agenda and what you were just presenting, March 8th, you guys are all set? Cool. All right. Don't have to do anything here. One thing we were talking about before, and I know you kind of addressed it up there, was and just a meet and greet with both JWA and Colliers. Just go out in the hallway here, invite the public in, and say, you know, hello and shake hands and do whatever we need to do just to get people just primed to the idea. So I just wanted to see what everybody thought about something like that. Yes.
I just was thinking, I think something to get us kicked off would be a great idea.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about something in mid to late March, it would be ideal to lock that down as soon as possible so that
Yeah.
we have time to get that out to the community and give people a chance to get it on their calendars and actually attend.
What we do to one of the middle schools so people in the community have an opportunity to see the conditions.
We'll open our doors to that. For our rainy day.
Bring your bathing suit.
That's fine, I mean.
Is there a particular evening event happening or late afternoon event happening at either school that might be a good jumping off point?
Drama club is always Thursday.
Oh, like after school?
Yeah, I just was curious if there's already a conference night or a concert or anything else that
No,
might.
we just did all of those.
Okay, yeah.
We have a Godzilla coming soon.
There's, I know there's an elementary school strings concert at some point at the middle school.
We can serve it in the district calendar. My assistant Diane is really good at sort of picking dates for community-wide events, so I can chat with her and connect back with the committee and.
And would that
Yeah.
be the community visioning event that we're thinking about?
You had community visioning up there. We just had more just meet and greet. Like,
Right.
here's
Just to do
JWA.
introductions, they
Here's
can-
Colliers. Hey, what's your role? What's
Right.
your role?
Right.
Like, and not really anything formal or structured. You know,
Yeah.
just maybe have a storyboard or whatever else out there about what's.
Yeah.
I think if
What's
you're having
expected next?
another event that folks are going to be at, even if it's an event that might be happening at the senior center or anything else in town, I think that might be a good opportunity for that meet and greet
Just have,
environment.
maybe we can have Diane survey
Yeah.
with Michael
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
to see if there's some.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's an election on Tuesday, and if we knew the date and time of whatever we're talking about, we could have a big poster in the community house advertising it. I don't know. The other thought I had was a sign up to stay informed, so that we might not know information right now, but when we do, we already have their email and can push out. Your distribution list is probably gonna be the most helpful,
Yeah,
but we know the ones that come to vote. so.
right.
That's really helpful.
That's a
to-
great idea.
Yeah.
To start generating that. And I know you have a project site within the district page, but as we release all these, you'll start seeing more PowerPoints than you've ever imagined, putting all of those out, and then the final reports at each phase, and the more available they are to people and tying in, that's very helpful too.
Yeah, that's something Armin and I and Marty talked about a little bit, is just making sure that we have, if there's a link on the middle school website that they can go to between Colliers and JWA, just making sure that we update that with, current,
Yeah.
helpful, relevant information.
Yeah.
Yeah, the East Long Meadow project, I gotta give them kudos for the information they put out there.
Yeah.
It's a great way to promote the Long Meadow app if there's a specific item on there that can bring them right to this information.
There's a Long Meadow app?
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
You don't have it?
Breaking her heart.
No idea. You're missing out.
I guess I am.
All the kids are on it.
All the That's why, Marty, that's why.
It's hot.
All right, so we'll scan and see if we can get that and get it to you as quick. Okay. And then the last one we had was the community outreach and communication. So yeah, we're talking, that's kind of what we're talking about right there.
Yeah.
But these next steps of the visioning sessions, how we're going to develop the dates and the times and what work, or how does this work best?
Often, projects will have, there's this meeting, and then there's a smaller meeting of us directly with the school and district leadership perhaps, to kind of look at calendars and talk about this, because we want to make this not interrupting the rest of your important work. So we could get together and just try and work through that a little bit and have some of that conversation, because I think there's probably a lot of thoughts you have about the best venue for doing that. But if the committee has input to that now, what we want to do in that event is, again, make it someplace easy for people to get to at a time that you find in this town works well, based on people's work schedules, and advertise it well, enough time to get the word out. And I don't know if you have precedent that you can think about that have been successful for bringing people out for something like this. And how much, I'd say if the community is not primed and ready for it, it might require inviting people, so it might be taking time to think about who are we going to ask? Because it's really the cross-section of people that we're trying to get, so that we get enough variety and dialogue at that event. So we kind of look to you a little bit for thoughts about how best to go about that.
So I would suggest to the committee that in the past, it's worked very well for it just to be direct, like you said, from Marty and the principals to direct to you to set those sessions up. I mean, unless somebody on the committee has a strong opinion about wanting to be involved in the setting up of meetings, and then I would just say, yeah, I think that's worked best in the past. I mean, we do sensing sessions within the district all the time. I mean, bringing in consultants and parent councils and everything else to so, but
I think just-
administration does a great job of that.
I'm happy to do that. And just getting the dates on the calendar, and then you build the event, lock in the date, and then figure out how to advertise it and where it's going to be and everything. But, yeah, we're happy to do that.
Good. All right, well then, make it so.
All right.
Okay, we've gone through all the new business. Is there anything else anybody has questions about, comments? It's been a great meeting. I really appreciate all the information we've gotten tonight. We've got a great team in place. Let's keep the progress moving forward.
Motion to adjourn?
I will recognize that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Julie?
Yes.
Marvin, yes. Marty?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Davis? Chris is not there anymore, so we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.